Hello, everybody. Thanks for stopping by. This is another conversation, a big brain conversation. Today, I'm talking with my homie. You probably know her. Her name is Alonna Williams, and she just finished, or should I call you? What is it? Alonna Williams, MA, Doctor
That's-
Alonna. What is?
Just say my name. I don't really know what it is. If it's MAMS, I've got no idea.
You want to let the people know what is your MA or MS in, and maybe just give them a little bit of a background on why you studied what
Okay, so I have finished my master's in international development, which I usually describe as like a degree that's kind of like project management mixed with economics. But my school really focused on the sustainability goals from the UN, and we kind of like look at look at policies and programs in the lens of the SDG goals. So if you don't know what they are, there are 17 goals that the UN has created back in 2015, and it's part of their 2030 agenda. So they want to, further us along. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Millennium Development Goals, which is like only 8 goals. And those were basically just kind of focused on poverty. So the SDGs focus on a lot of different things. So like poverty, education, inequality, justice system, environment. So it's a way more comprehensive goals. And so that's kind of like what that is. So like one of my favorite things that we had a speaker come who helped negotiate the goals. He said there's no developed country. Like no country has reached all of the goals. Like every country is still developing, just different ways. And I really like that because I think just focusing on only economic development is kind of problematic because if you look at the US, we're economically developed, sure, but there's lots of other issues that we are dealing with. So that's kind of like the overview of my degree. So we've studied things from climate, economic development, partnerships. I specialize in data and technology and sustainable development and also social inclusion. So I took courses on peace, um, gender, and inclusive education. So yeah.
Okay. So you have a lot of that almost lattice work of that background that comprises what you have today ended up in this thesis that I wanted to talk to you about today. And so what she spoke directly to in her thesis was this idea of foreign direct investment or FDI. And one of the things that kind of caught my attention with it was I follow her on Twitter. And so it's one of those things I was seeing kind of the updates as she was finishing this master's degree. And I just thought it was interesting to see what that would culminate to. But after reading it, I was really intrigued as well as just the ideas of, especially in this day and age where I feel like everything is beginning to, like, the way we approach developing nations or how we approach developed quote unquote nations and how we, like, what is that engagement, what is that exchange going to look like as we move into the future, and we don't want it to be a repeat, right, of like past exchanges that were of literal humans, right? And so now we're trying to get to a place where we can do something that's more equitable. And so I just wanted to speak to her on that, kind of get some of the ideas parsed out a bit. One of the things that caught my eye was like pretty much the first sentence of this thesis where you said that the British economist Paul Collier had said that war is development in reverse.
Yeah.
And I just wanted you to maybe expound on that or kind of give the people a little bit of your idea as to how that it almost seems this idea of development sometimes is tied in with this idea of this war all the time. Or I don't know if that's a good way to put it. Maybe you could.
Yeah, I see what you're trying to say. So like we think of like in order like the way that we are right now in order to further it's mainly economics because no one has really been focusing on like the circular economy or like social inclusion and stuff like that. Most of it's just economic development. So like in order to further economic development, these superpowers with hegemony start wars so they can conquer whatever. Like we see in this all through history, like if you want to grow your empire and stuff like that. So the war is so I think what Collier was trying to get at now, I think this quote was maybe in the mid 2000s, he said this, I can't remember. But now when we see like a lot of the wars, like if you study peace, there's like new wars. So most of the new wars are actually civil wars. And that really impedes on development in a lot of different ways. And a lot of times it even comes from lack of development. So like if they say like, oh, poverty, like they say like poverty can be a cause of conflict because of this and that, depending on the reasonings of the poverty. But so yeah, especially like with civil wars, like you are literally destroying your infrastructure, country's infrastructure. So like where you're gonna get jobs, like where you're gonna go to work, like where you're gonna live, like literally, like you're destroying like everything. And then it's just sometimes even the breakdown of the social, like the social cohesion, especially what we're seeing in Ethiopia, like you have literally groups warring against each other. So that whole social development isn't there. And then like the human development, like how can you even develop yourself if you can't find a job, if you food is scarce, like something like that. So like it's literally like these wars, because I think a lot of the wars are civil wars, are really not even helping the economics of the country like it has in the past, like regular wars. But like it's just literally destroying everything. So
Self-cannibalizing in that way. Do
yeah.
you still speak in your classrooms about maybe politically incorrect starts to how these civil wars begin, or is it all kind of within the realm of this is the official narrative? Because sometimes I feel like there is this pernicious idea that maybe some of these bigger powers are, whether maybe not directly, but you have evidence of things like the Bay of Pigs, there's stuff trying to infiltrate and subjugate different governments for their own personal benefits. Have you guys spoken to that?
Yeah. So the really great thing about my school is that there's so many people from so many different countries. In my class, my cohort, it was 33 of us, and only 4 of us were Americans. So we are getting people from all over the world. Literally, I think there are like 20 different countries and just there are 33 people. So lots of those countries where people were places where the US has meddled into their politics and things like that. So they don't like they understand like the US can be responsible for some of the stuff that's going on in certain regions of the world. So yeah, it definitely was not politically correct. Like we were saying, whatever. Like honestly, the discussions are really great. My classmates are super like smart, and like just hearing just different points of view, especially from people from China and like the Middle East. Like it's just a really, really good environment to be in. And like there was political correctness, like no.
That's good. That's good to hear for the Free Thought Project, especially. But another thing I wanted to ask you, so this idea of foreign direct investment or FDI, how does that? Because one of the things I found interesting as I was reading through your thesis was this idea that there are some indicators, some studies that have found that there's a negative correlation between investments and positive outcomes. And I just thought that was such a, I'm like, is this real? Like, how is this working like that? So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that, because how could it possibly be you investing, but somehow it's still divesting from that populace?
Yeah, that shocked me too when I was doing the literature review, like that, and the fact that democracy sometimes would like it would do the opposite. It made like investors less confident to invest in that country because of what we know about democracy and things like that. So like sometimes foreign direct investment, if if you break it down, when you like read like the research, you learn that there's different types of FDI. So there's like FDI for different sectors. So like the first sector is like the primary sector, which is like oil, natural resources. The second sector, I forgot which one that one, but the third one was it's called Greenfield FDI, and that's like services and things like that. So that's like
Mhm.
so if you're seeing like a negative effect, like if you're putting, because FDI can be like investments into a country, like physical money, and it can also be education, like management skills or things like that. So if you're seeing it going the opposite way, you might be looking at corruption, honestly. Like if you're getting investments into a country and it's not helping the growth, might need to look at governance, seeing how where your money is going to, maybe the industry, like is it going and who controls that industry. So like if you're investing into like let's say Uganda or like you see for example, and they are putting a lot of money into natural resources and things like that, and the government is the one that is controlling that, and they are corrupt. They're not, it doesn't get to the people. So of course you're going to see negative growth because or no growth because they're not even using those investments
Going
to
to
like
people that it's supposed
point
to.
is to pass it on, but they're not. It's getting stuck somewhere.
That
So
like
in that,
let's see if the trickle down stuff that they talk about how that doesn't actually work, but in this case it almost feels even more directed because when you have these actors that feel like they're above the law, because in some ways they are when you create the law, you feel like maybe you are the law. And so in these underdeveloped nations where there isn't a strong legal code or system where these people might be put behind bars or have to face repercussions, they're just able to act without, I guess, regard to anything else. And that's just this, it's kind of the sad reality. And I don't know if there's a direct solution right now, but it just feels like there needs to be more collaboration on this. I don't know, like
yeah.
this leadership.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, actually, what you're getting at is state capacity and implementation. That's what's like a really, really big core thing of my thesis. Is like, I didn't have enough time, but I wanted to do like in the stats, do an implementation kind of like effect term to see how implementation or the perception of state capacity and implementation would affect investors and how they like if they're like, okay, well, this country probably they have this peace agreement provision, but they may not implement it. So we might just, we don't really care what's going on. Like, well, maybe we're going to invest in somewhere that's a little bit safer. So something like that, I didn't get to do that, but implementation is, especially the literature review was like a really big point was saying like, yeah, you may have all this FDI, but if you don't have the capacity to absorb it.
It almost feels like, in a way, though, that this is another case of you have these big institutions who are these bigger sovereign nations, and then you have these people who it almost feels like the like the bad credit score, or like you have this like a community of folks who aren't able to have access to that higher quality capital. I don't know if this makes sense. It's like, and one of the things I did want to bring up too was this idea of looking at the data, because as somebody who had to actually study these things, a lot of times, and I can speak to this definitely as somebody who can be emotional, I feel like sometimes the data and the emotions, and we actually had this conversation a couple weeks ago, there's this disconnect, but at the same time, there has to be this reconnect to where there is some, this is what the actual numbers say about FDI and how it impacts these places, and this is how we're actually doing things. And so, what kind of, I don't know if there's better, like, one of the things too, maybe is GDP. Is that a great indicator moving forward? Or like other, like, what are some of the indicators you see as good ones that we can look at to help with FDI, and then maybe some other thoughts that you had?
Well, when you're talking about FDI, it's actually investors look at GDP. Like a lot of these investors are like, okay, because they look at market share. So like they're looking at the population size, they're looking at, and a lot of times GDP is kind of correlated with like implementation and capacity. So it's like, okay, well, if you have a low GDP, like why? Like we're looking into economic development. Like, well, why aren't you economically developed? Like, is your country like you just can't, like you're not stable? Like what's happening here? So there's a lot of other things that interact with FDI, which is like what I did in the stats was use controls. Like I had to control for market share. So like the labor market. So how big is the population? GDP is actually something you do control for because investors look at the GDP and they're kind of like, is this growing? Because like, you don't want to invest in a country that's not growing. Like, okay.
So
So,
that I sent you, and I'll let you finish right after this too, because I think this is important. My bad, but it said that financial investors are looking for a return, while emotional investors are looking to make an impact or to give something. And I don't know if that actually impacts at all. Maybe the answer you're going to get, but
um, well, FDI usually is more like social impact investing is really new. So there's really like
so it's
not
pretty
too much research
economic,
about
right?
it. Is what?
It's pretty much economic, right? Like a lot of it is geared through the lens of fiscal policies.
That's more like FDI. I think social impact investing is more literally about social impact, about how it affects people's lives and like a lot more, I feel like just in like my masters is becoming more popular and people are paying more attention to it. and looking at, I think they're starting to look at investing more than just economic and financial. Um, and really, I think it's a really big push to try to make sure like monitoring valuation, like, does this program do what we set out for it to do? Is it doing that? And if not, what do we need to adjust? So we took classes like results-based management, like literally like that's what it sounds like, results-based management. Like we have put this program in it and they put in certain things to track it, and then they track it. You're supposed to track like every 6 months to a year to see like what is going on. Are we making a difference? So my paper was really based off of like financial investors. Like what are these? Because like I think the private sector can play a big role because they're the ones with the money. Like, so like we should be really looking at their behavior and what's affecting their behavior. So other countries don't get left behind. So yeah, I don't know. Social impact investing is really interesting.
Yeah. I think that if there was some way that they could be more collaborative, I don't know if that's the right word, where you have the like communication channels that are open between these organizations that are controlling the financial stuff and then people that are controlling like, because there is this disconnect, right? When you're giving strictly financially, it's hard to know if the return socially is enough to offset what you might be losing financially, right? So if you're
Are you an
giving,
economist? Do you study international development?
no, I
Are you
just
sure you never did?
no, I
Yeah,
haven't.
that's actually SDG 17 partnerships. So it's talking about public and private partnerships and how these partnerships, what like, because we can do more together. So like, where is the disconnect? What's going on? Like, so bigger companies, especially like with corporate social responsibility, there a lot of places are having way more CSR departments and things like that. So they're really trying to push like more partnerships to see like how they can like maybe offset their negative externalities, like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, these big companies that have, social, like they have social programs in certain countries, especially countries that they operate in. But yeah, those are conversations people in international development space are having, and it's actually one of the SDG goals. It's 17 is partnerships to see like how we can work together to make it better, pretty much.
Okay. That's interesting. I think one of the final things that I wanted to bring to your attention was in this era of, I don't know, if we view these problems as strictly financial, and I guess we've been kind of already going down this road, but are we shortchanging ourselves on some of the other forms of aid that are also valuable? Like you talked about valuation and how we not only evaluate the person who is receiving the aid, but how do we evaluate maybe the situation that that government is in, the how do we evaluate what we're giving them? And I'm just thinking, like in the future, in I don't know, in a marketplace where a lot of the stuff is going to be intellectual property and this not as infrastructure based, but maybe more internet based. I wonder if something like having Facebook outsource some of its market share to a place in Africa where they can run it in a similar way to how you have that idea with McDonald's where people have their own outposts. I wonder if that could be something where in the future you're giving ownership instead of just money. And this is kind of getting outside the scope of what you were writing about, but I was just something that I was thinking about was like things like intellectual property or human capital and like outside of the scope of just giving money, because sometimes that feels like a black hole, as we said before, we're just going to the wrong pockets. Maybe empowering the people so it's not just giving them fish, but teaching how to fish. And I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Well, FDI is not just only money. What you're talking about is also FDI. So human capital and like giving market share, like that's whatever pretty much is investing into this country. Like that's it's going to help with like, so that FDI isn't just like, that's the easiest way. It's like, oh, I'm investing my currency into this country, FDI, but it's also knowledge and
Okay.
but You said something that was really interesting. Oh, yes, teaching them how to fish. That's the whole, also kind of another shift international development is having, that I've noticed, that you kind of want to, if you're a nonprofit, you kind of want to have an out. Like you want to go in there and train people to do what you're doing and to like help them out. But then, you don't want to stay there so they become dependent on you. And that's like conversations that we've had in class too. It's like, if you're an NGO or you're, someone like going in there and just doing whatever and then leaving all with all your resources, and then that you didn't transfer any knowledge or anything, like how you're helping anybody. So that's a really big, I think, shift that's happening now. It's like paying attention to, okay, we want local talent here. Like when I apply for jobs for the UN, a lot of it's like local, they're what do they call it? Local recruitment. So they're recruiting people from the area because they want them to get these skills and gain these skills. So I think that's really cool. It's less, sounds great for me, but I'm happy for it. Like just to recruit things and put jobs with the local people, because you can't just, brain drain is a thing. Like you're leaving, like you're just like, okay. And then all the people who are educated in your country leave, go somewhere else. And it's like, okay, well, no, we need to invest here and teach the people here and make it good here and get jobs here. So that's really a push. So I'm saying, are you sure you're not a national development student? Like their questions are spot on.
Appreciate that. I like to think of myself as I just like to learn a lot. I like to be a sponge. And so whenever there's something that strikes me as interesting, I can just go on a binge for an hour or two. But I feel like just the geopolitics of today has caused me to be a little more aware of how some of these things operate.
Yeah.
And I think
It's
that you're
all like they called it a Rubik's Cube. That's what they called it when we were in our policy coherence class. It's like everything is a Rubik's Cube. Like, so something this country is doing will affect something in this country. And it's all like, all the stuff that's going on. Yeah, literally. There's literally a sustainable development one with like the UN and things. They have like a Rubik's Cube. I did not get one, but I saw it. But yeah, it's everything affects everything. And so whatever, that's why it's like, okay, there's really no developed country. I really liked that when he said that. He's like, there is no country that has reached all 17 of these goals. Like everyone has something to work on. And it's, do you have the political will to do it? Do you have the capacity to do it? That's kind of like where we're at now.
Mm.
It's kind of, it can be dismal sometimes.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. We'll end there because I think that we could open up another can if we wanted to, but there's definitely a lot to think about. Thank you so much, Alana. I just wanted to also say, with that idea that there is no developed country, is that still something that you feel is, because when I see these big like potential schisms in the world, like the West and China or something, and how those kind of infiltrate every other discussion, with whether you have like it's this capitalism, communism, whether you have Eastern versus whatever it is, it almost feels like the development of each individual nation is tied into the development of every other one. And this is like this big dance that we're doing.
Yep. Globalization.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like some countries, like the hegemony, especially of the US and China, it all is tied in together. And the colonial past, like you can't, like if you're in Spain, like you can see that, like you feel it, like you can feel if they were a colonizer, and like know that their history is still tied to South America and stuff like that. Or you're seeing with Haiti and France, like they're like, you guys owe us billions of dollars. Like France is like, no. So just all of that, like it's all tied together. And I mean, it always has been, like it always has been. Like, you look back at like one of our professors was talking about how China is coming back. Like we weren't alive when China was like a superpower, but hundreds of years ago, China was a superpower. Like they were the ones that were rich, and it was the West that was like trying to figure out how to even like wash themselves. So it's like it's always been tied together. And it's like, and then at one point the West got rich and they were in Asia, Southeast Asia, colonizing everything, making it worse. And so it's just kind of like an ebb and flow of all of it. So it never was separate. It was never isolated. Like no country was ever isolated. So it's just now I feel like the stakes are more because it's like our technology is growing exponentially. So there's like so much technology able to just wipe us out or like just change our lives. And so, it's globalization
On
is
we could all be in a utopia, or we could end in like a nuclear war. It's like like pick your poison. So we'll see
that's
how
true.
it ends up. Maybe we'll make it through this year.
Woo! I hope we make it through. I hope we get the utopia.
Yeah, we'll get
I
there.
have faith.
Hey, where can the people find you on the internet if you would like to be followed anywhere?
You can search my name on LinkedIn, add me there. I love LinkedIn. Or you can add me on Instagram at Lons is a Storm. And if I know you personally, you can use that on Twitter and I'll accept you. My tweets are locked.
All right. I love it. Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. And to the people that listened all the way through, appreciate you. Hope you learned a thing or
Thank
two.
you. If you
Um,
want to read my thesis, just reach out.
yeah. All right. Go ahead and let her know if you want to read it. I'd highly suggest. All right, thing or two. Anyway, peace, love, and y'all stay wavy. And also wash your hands.